Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining. This is Lisa Robertson, and just a purpose of the meeting, I want to go over, Sheila will be giving an overview of the EPI, the External Provider Interface. She will be reviewing some of the materials in the iConnect library. Sharon will give an update on the SFTP development, and then we'll have questions and answers. So Sheila, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa, and good morning, everyone. I know we still have some providers that are joining us, and but we wanted to be respectful of everyone's time and make sure that there was enough time for some of your questions and get you some answers. Many of you have participated in these webinars before, and it's been almost a year since the last time we had a webinar specific to the external provider interface. So we just wanted to come back and give a general introduction and an overview to it. For those of you that are familiar with our GoToWebinar platform, as you know, you're all muted. So if you have questions, please use the question box that you can find on your GoTo dashboard, and we'll be monitoring those questions. And then, as Lisa indicated at the end, we'll have time to go over questions and see if we can get you some answers. So with that said, let me go ahead and just jump in and give a little bit of an overview about the external provider interface. And you will hear me say EPI interchangeably with external provider interface. What it is specifically is we know that we have some providers that prior to APD iConnect have been using their own or have contracted out for an electronic health record information system, or an EHR. And some of those providers had contacted us early on and had indicated we'd like to still use that system and have our information imported into APD iConnect. And so that's how the external provider interface came into being. Now, it is limited in scope in terms of what it's able to do at this time. Right now, the external provider interface will only allow providers to transmit information that would be in their service logs, attendance logs, trip logs, progress notes, quarterly summaries, and annual summaries. And so it's very specific to documentation for services delivered. There has been some confusion in recent months about whether or not the external provider interface would support information that's captured in a different electronic visit verification or EVV system. And it does not. And so I really want to make sure that we stress that. You'll hear me say it several times that the external provider interface is not designed to import information from an electronic visit verification system. The primary reason is that the APD EVV solution is a closed system, which means that in order for our providers to be in compliance with the federal mandate for electronic visit verification, they will need to use the APD iConnect EVV mobile site. So that's one of the things that that I wanted to be sure I stressed for everyone today. And then the other thing that I wanted to do was talk a little bit about the file formats and how that information is transmitted from your system if you have one. And again, let me just stress that because we may have some providers on here who saw the advisory, they're like, hey, I wonder what that external provider interface is all about. If you are a provider who does not have an electronic health record information system, you don't have to go get one. This is not something that's required. This is something that is optional for those agencies who are already working with another system or working with another vendor. So I did want to remind everyone that this is not optional. And if it turns out that you are a provider that doesn't have an electronic health record system and you have no desire to get one, you don't need to stay on the webinar today. You are welcome to stay on and gather information, but I do want to let you know that it is not required for you to get one or to use the external provider interface. You can simply log into APD iConnect and enter your documentation directly. I do see that we have one person who has their hand up. If you've got a question, please type it into the question box, and we'll circle back to the questions after we've gone through the presentation. The other thing that I wanted to talk a little bit about is what does this mean for you? If you do have an electronic health record system, and you are interested in exploring the use of the external provider interface, then what it will require you to do is make some modifications with your system in order to be able to get the information out of APD iConnect. I'm sorry, out of your system so that you can import it into APD iConnect. And so that's one of the things that you do want to be aware of, is we're going to talk a little bit today about what the required information is, but we will not be able to tell you how to modify your system or those kinds of things. That is all a responsibility that falls back to the provider. So I did want to stress that. And let me go ahead and share my screen, and we'll talk a little bit about the information that is available on our website. So where I am right now is our public website. I know that you're all familiar with it, and I wanted to start here so that you would know how to get to where the information is. From our homepage, you simply just go to the waivers menu, and then you choose APD iConnect from here. And that will bring you to our APD iConnect homepage. Now, as many of you know, the homepage has information about what's happening, what the system is, what's happening with our training. We do provide updates in terms of what's coming in terms of the implementation schedule. But where you're going to want to focus if you're interested in information about the external provider interface is you will want to start with the provider's library. So you click on the link on the side here, and then you'll see right at the top, we have another link for the external provider interface, or as you're going to hear me say often, the EPI. If you click on the EPI, it will take you to a subpage where all of the information that we have so far kept in our library. So starting at the bottom, these are the meetings that we had last year to talk about the external provider interface. If you've not seen these videos from those meetings, I recommend that you go and start here and start with session 1 from last August, because that's when we really got into some details about what the external provider interface is. We also talked about all of these documents and did a little bit of demonstration with these documents. So that meeting is a good place to start if you've not already seen it. And then the subsequent meetings, sessions 2 and 3, were a lot of questions and answers. And so this is probably a place that you're going to want to visit on a regular basis and just kind of capture the information, because it will help you as providers to understand what it is that you need to do to get the information out of your EHR so that you can import it into APD iConnect. And in a few moments, we're going to talk about how to get a file put together and do some testing, and that will bring us back to this test data right here. But I don't want to get ahead of myself on that. We'll circle back to that in a few minutes. At this point, what I'll do is, Sriram, I will turn it over to you so you can give an update to folks on the SFTP, what that means, and where we are with developing that.
Okay, thank you, Sheila. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good morning. So this is an update regarding the secure FTP environment APD has been working on. So at this time, we have already created a secure FTP site in the cloud using Amazon Web Services technology. Since we are a government agency, and also this secure FTP site will be taking care of a lot of PHI and a good volume of sensitive information. We are having to make sure that from several different dimensions, this is set up securely, and also as much automation as possible we could do. So that's where we are right now. We are working on the enhancement of that site, mainly the automation piece, and also making sure that it's secure enough so that we won't have to worry about that once we start allowing the providers to transfer the data. And in addition to that, WellSky, our software vendor, they're also working on their side the last piece, the automation piece, to complete this project. So we are making good progress, but as I said, there are lots of details working with Amazon and WellSky on the other side, and also the security is our first focal point, and then the other automation piece. That's where we are. So I think we will be communicating regularly. Once we are ready, we will be involving initially, a few providers to start testing, and then just scale up to the larger provider community. So we are getting there. So that's about the SFTP update, Sheila. So is there anything you need me to cover?
No, not at this point, Sriram. If we get any additional questions, I'll tag you on that. I am monitoring the question box. And again, those of you who have your hands raised up, please, if you've got questions, type them in the box. And we do have a question about the test environment. We're going to talk about the test environment in just a few minutes, but I did want to mention as a follow-up, Sriram, to what you were saying, is that while the SFTP is still in development, that won't prevent providers from working on creating their XML files to test right now, because we will have a manual way of processing those test files, which is actually a great segue to turn it over to Steve to talk about our test process and how we're going to handle that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Steve, are you there? I think you're on mute, Steve.
I was having difficulty finding the unmute button. Can you hear me now, Sheila?
Yes.
Group, great. So yeah, so to step back just a second. So the secure FTP site will be used, again after this goes into production. But in order to help, as Sheila mentioned, those providers who are ready and eager to test their implementation on their side of the electronic file transfer, we have set up a process to allow assistance in providing those providers with a test environment for building their side of the interface, I guess is the easiest way to say it. And that gets us back to the API website that Sheila pointed out and is currently displayed on your screen. So we can, we're hoping that we can provide enough information here to help the providers technical team, I think, more in developing their side of that electronic file transfer. Without going into all the details that are available here on this site, I just wanted to let y'all know that this would allow y'all to have a jump start in y'all's system development to be compatible with the iConnect API interface. Sheila, I joined a little bit late. Did y'all did you cover the communication channel? We have a dedicated APD mailbox for the subject matter experts to communicate with our testing team.
Yeah, Steve, we hadn't gone
I
over
don't
that
s-
yet. And
Okay.
so I did bring it up here on the advisory. This is the email address that we have set up specifically for the external provider interface related questions, for providers to send over their test XML files.
Okay, great. So once the providers have familiarized themselves with at least the published data on the website, they can start communicating with us to get more, direct response and assistance in interpreting and implementing that, that interface. Again, this will be in a test scenario. So Sheila, if you could go back to the website, maybe just briefly, the
Yep.
instructional website for the EPI.
As soon as I get the right pointer going on my device, there we go.
Right. So as Sheila was circling a moment ago, the website starts off with test data. You will need to be using specifically this data. Don't be concerned that it doesn't match your data. That's by design. Since it's in a test environment, we want a controlled data set, but you should be able to interpret that data as if it were your own and build your XML file and then submit it back to that email box, and we'll validate the file for you, or if you're not so lucky, let you know what's wrong with it so you can tweak it and resubmit it if necessary, and complete the validation process. Again, this is to give you a jump start to be more ready when the production implementation occurs.
And Steve, if I could
I
just
think that's
tag
all
on
I
to that,
had.
I think one of the
Okay.
things that we do want to stress, because you'd said that we want to use this test data. So when you're creating your file, and again, all of the things in the documents tells you how to create your file, and also in that session 1 webinar. So that's where you get the information on the how. But in terms of the what goes into that test file, if my agency is Sheila's Waiver Services and I'm wanting to submit test data, I'm going to use this test data here, but it's not going to be submitted for Sheila's Waiver Services. It's going to be submitted for, let me just go ahead and open one of these so I can demonstrate. It's going to be a different provider name. So if you send it with your agency's name and your agency's submitter ID, then it will fail. So again, if my agency is Sheila's Waiver Services and the name on my XML file references Sheila's Waiver Services, that's not going to work. It really needs to come as the EPI test provider, because that's where the test data is stored. So keep that in mind when you're naming your XML files. Follow the naming format that you'll find in the information on our website, but change the name to the EPI test provider for everywhere that the name is referenced in the XML file. And that should help your file to get passed through the import process.
Right, and just to add to that, Sheila, also the specific client data needs to match that test client data.
Correct, which is why we've
Even though
provided
it's,
these
yeah,
reports
right.
here, because it gives you the consumer information for, in this example here, our consumers, they're all consumer 1, 2, 3, and their last name is EPI. So it's always going to be based on that. And your workers are always going to be the EPI worker 1. So those are things to keep in mind. Don't use any of your staff's names. Don't use your actual consumer names. We want you to in essence create a record for EPI consumer 1, for example, in your system so that you can then create your XML file based upon that consumer and as if you were the EPI test provider.
Okay, I think that was one of the major confusion points, because the instructions do indicate that you should use your provider name, your consumer information, but those instructions are of course geared toward the runtime, the real production system, which in that case you would
That's
use the
correct.
real data there. You know. Okay, that's all I had, Sheila. Unless again you've had experience in other areas that might be useful to
Yeah, Steve, no, that
inform
was
them
really
on.
what I wanted
Yeah.
to highlight. So for if you're just getting started, if this is the first webinar that you've joined regarding the external provider interface, my recommendations are let's come back here and start with the videos from last year. Go in order 1, 2, 3. Look at the documents that are here so that you can understand what's being asked of you. If you contract out with a third party vendor, you will want to share all of this information with them because they're the ones that are going to need to modify the system that you've purchased. And then from there, once you have a good understanding, or your IT person has a good understanding, or the IT person at your third party vendor has a good understanding, and people want to start working on creating an export file, then you're going to come and download these 3 reports right here, because they will have all of the data that you need to set up your system on your side and then export it out into an XML file. And then once you've got that exported XML file, you go ahead and you send it to this iConnect EPI email address that we have here in the provider advisory. And there are several of us that are monitoring that inbox, and we will take your XML file, as Steve said, and we'll import it in, and whatever the response is, we will send back to you. We're all going to cross our fingers, and what we're sending back to you is success. You've created an importable XML file, or oops, it didn't work, and here's why. Here's what you need to look at. And so the idea is that you've got your system running with this test data so that when we get to the point of actually having the external provider interface go live in APD iConnect, then you'll be able to get the information that you need from APD iConnect about your consumers, your authorizations, all of that information. So I know in the videos from last year that are on, down here in the video presentation, I know that there is reference to you need to run a report out of APD iConnect to get that information. Don't ask for that report yet. We want you to run it on the test data first so that we can make sure that your export process works. And then we'll get to a point of where and how you run that report to get the actual true APD iConnect data. So at this point, we are at the Q&A part. I didn't expect the actual let's go over the information part to take terribly long today. I only see one question in the QA box right now, and that is whether or not there's going to be a test environment. And I think we just went over that. It's not really a test environment that you as providers will access, but you will send us your XML files and we will run them through our test environment on your behalf. And then as Sriram said earlier, when we get to the point of testing the SFTP site, we will work with a handful of providers to test that. But it won't be so much as opening it to everybody, because you will have already tested that your XML file works by sending it to the iConnect EPI at apdcares.org email box. So I do want to go ahead and open it up. If you've got additional questions, please type them in, and we have plenty of time to take them. So we have a question. Looks like the activity import is client schedule. Is that right? Not exactly. And if you are not yet in APD iConnect and you've not yet attended training, some of this might be a little bit confusing for you. But and I'm actually going to stop sharing my screen while I talk and log into our training site just so I can demonstrate for you if you've not had training yet. But again, it's not the schedule that you'll be importing. What you will be importing is the actual service log, quarterly summary, annual report, progress notes, those kinds of handbook required documentation records that are necessary. Give me just a few seconds to get logged into our training site, and then I will pull up an example. Steve, were you going to add something?
No, I'm sorry.
Well, that's okay.
Just
And I'm
let me
locked out of
mute.
the training site. Let me go ahead and go into our testing site and see if I can bring up a record there. So we do have another question about, will there be a need to sign in the sign-in log? If you could add a little bit more to what you mean by the sign-in log, I'm not familiar with sign-in logs. That would be helpful so that I could better answer your question, please. And bear with me, I'm almost there. And we do have a question, can I just export the personal supports note from another app and download it into APD iConnect? And the answer is no, you cannot do that, which is what I was saying earlier. There is no interface for electronic visit verification at this time. This is specific to adding in what we refer to as provider documentation records, or the service log. So you're not going to be able to just download it from one and import it into the other. If it is for a non-EVV service, you will be able to use the external provider interface and create an XML file for import, but it has to be done via the specifications that are listed on our website. So now we are in our test site, and I'm using some test data. And again, for those of you who may not have been through training before, this is what a consumer's record looks like in APD iConnect. And what we're talking about in terms of what can you import via the external provider interface is where we create the provider documentation for a service that's delivered. And so it's tied to the authorization. It has a start date, start time, end date, end time. It has the ability to choose this service based on the authorization. But when you're looking at your system, what you're thinking about in terms of what you're importing are these types of provider documentation that are listed below. This is all that can be sent over via the external provider interface. So from your system, you'll see in the specifications for the XML file, there's a place for the start date, the start time, all of that information that's here on the screen. And then your service log or your progress note or your annual report all gets typed into this note field right here. So that's where that information will go. And again, your XML file is intended to pull that out of your existing system, convert it into XML language so that we can then import it directly into APD iConnect. I do have a question regarding the test XML file. We need to use the data that's included in the sample files. Do we need to use the one that's provided? I think I understood that right. Yes. So again, coming back over here, when you get to the point of creating your test XML file, download all 3 of these reports because each one has a piece of the information that's required in your XML file. And all of the required information and what it means is in this APD provider activities import fields spreadsheet. That's how you can translate from these 3 reports what goes where in your XML file. Sign-in log is the time entered to the individual's home and the time left. I don't know if sign-in logs are a requirement of the handbook, but as you can see, I've lost my window. For our consumer, you are definitely putting in the date and time that the service is delivered. And again, we're talking about non-EVV services. So these aren't even services that are live yet. Keep that in mind. And so I don't know about a sign-in log, but this would be what time the service started and what time the service ended on what day. And there can only be 1 record per day. So you would include everything for the same day in 1 record. I hope that helps with the sign-in log question. Does daily attendance have to be imported on a daily basis? No, our goal is that the daily attendance would actually be 1 record where, and as you see here, let me just go ahead and pick an example. And I'm just going to make up dates and times. So So when you click add, it creates the row that the record is there. And our goal, and we're still developing and testing this, our goal is that you would have multiple dates on the same record. Yesterday, they were there an hour longer. And so you would be able to have them that way. That's our goal. And again, we're still developing and testing this, but at this time, no, you wouldn't have to do a separate record for daily attendance log. All right, so I'm scrolling through the questions. Let's see. So somebody has mentioned that they think maybe there's a part of EVV where the family signs. And again, today we're not talking at all about the electronic visit verification because for our providers who do electronic visit verification, we have already provided training. We have already gone live with that. We've had several webinars for that. So if you do have questions about the electronic visit verification, I am going to refer you back to the provider library for those. Today, to avoid confusion, I want to make sure we stay focused on the external provider interface. So our next question is, once we get our XML file validated, can we begin uploading our documentation for personal supports? Now, if you're talking about personal supports and you're wanting to upload provider documentation records, which is what the service log is in APD iConnect, I'm going to stress that that has to be personal supports in one of the exempt settings or combinations. And there was a provider advisory for what is exempt from electronic visit verification when it comes to personal supports and respite. So if you're providing personal supports and you do not meet the exemption criteria, you should be using the electronic visit verification and you cannot include that in your XML file. If it is a situation that does meet the exemption requirement, then yes. Once you've got your XML file validated, Shriram, are we setting a date specific for manual? Because I know that we won't necessarily know when the exactly when the SFTP will be ready. Do we have a date for the manual import for XML files? Shriram, I think you might still be on mute.
Sheila, sorry, I missed your question. Can you repeat that? Yeah.
Sure. So the question was, are we going to set a date for when we will go live with manual import for the XML files if it's before the SFTP site is ready, or will we go live with both at the same time?
That's a good question. So we can discuss internally, Sheila. So yeah, we don't have to wait until the SFTP is ready, but we can discuss internally, and we can let the providers know the date. So
Okay, great.
yeah.
So yeah, in answer to your question there, Isaac, once you get it validated, you'll be ready to go. And as soon as we have a date for that, then you'll be able to start using it. But we don't have the go live date for that just yet. We have a question for the 24-hour services and 2 shifts, and you need to combine 2 different employees. So let me just use this example here. This is a burning question for a lot of our providers. Let's say that I work with the consumer today from 6 to 9, and tonight somebody else, or even myself, I come back and I'm going to work with the individual from 4 p.m. And we do have this information on our website, just so you guys know that we have we've done these demos and we've recorded them. So they are on the website as well. I do encourage you to use the library. And so you see, we've got 2 times for today. We've got 6 a.m. to 9 a.m., 4 p.m. to 10 p.m. And even if it's 2 different people that work the shift, as long as it's in pending status, then shift A, or yeah, we'll just go with shift A, types their service log. And I'll go ahead and call it a service log. And they save it in pending status. And later, shift B comes in and types their service log. And it will stay in pending status so that the provider, the agency owner, is able to review it before it's put into complete status. But that's how you do it. And if there's 3 different shifts, then each shift just keeps adding to this record until the shift is over. And again, that's because there can only be 1 record per day. Question of, is it mandatory to submit service logs or any other documentation? And that's a really good question. When the handbook was revised last summer, it did include the requirement that if a service is live, I'm going to use that term, in APD iConnect, then the documentation must be in the consumer's record in APD iConnect before you can submit your billing. So right now, respite and personal supports are live in APD iConnect. And so providers should make sure that their documentation is in APD iConnect before they submit their billing. But ResHab is not live in APD iConnect. So the requirement to have your documentation in APD iConnect for ResHab prior to billing isn't in effect because it's not live yet in APD iConnect. I have another question here of how often is the file imported? Is there a key for each activity so it can be updated, or is it a one-time data load? That is an excellent question. There's 2 questions there. One, you can create and import XML files as often as you want to. 2, it is a one-time only import. So if I imported a record for March 25th from 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. and I needed to make a change to it, I would actually have to log into APD iConnect and make the change right here in the record. You cannot transmit an updated XML file. So just wanted to mention that. That was a really good question. We do have another question about, does this pertain to incontinence supplies as well? And no, because again, when you think about the services and the types of documentation, I believe incontinence supplies, they submit invoices as their documentation and not so much the progress note or the service log. So this screen is specific to these types of documentation. When we get to the point of getting ready to go live for things like incontinence supplies or other services, there will be training for that, and you will learn then how to document for those services in APD iConnect. Moving back to the next question, if we meet the exemption for personal supports, then we need to manually enter dates of service in our service logs. So Isaac, yes, if you meet the exemption for electronic visit verification, then right now you should be logging into APD iConnect, going to John Demonstration's record, opening a provider documentation record, and adding in your service log the way that I'm doing it manually right now. Also, there's a question in terms of how does the authorization report fit into this? And I'm not sure what you mean by how does the oh, I'm sorry, you mean the authorization report on our website. So again, these three reports here are different ways of getting all of the information that you need to make sure is in your current electronic health record system so that you have it to export. So for some of you, you may have to create new fields because there are data elements that are specific to APD iConnect. And I'll give you the best example, the consumer's iConnect ID. If we look at John's iConnect ID is 64897, John Demonstration. You're not going to have a field for an iConnect ID in your existing system. So you're going to need to add those fields, and then using these reports to be able to create test records, then you're going to take that information from these reports and put them into your system so that there's data there to export. So that was a really good question. Thank you for that. I have a question here about whether or not CDC is exempted to submit documentation for billing purposes. I am not a CDC expert. What I can tell you is that CDC, I believe that the documentation is remaining with the CDC system and the process of how everything else that CDC does. So I don't want to say it's exempted from documentation. I just want to say that I'm not sure that the processes are the same. All right, I think that is all of the questions we have so far. For our APD team, is there anything that I missed or that you want to touch on again?
No, Sheila. I mean,
No.
I don't have anything.
All right, I'm going to wait one more second just in case anybody's typing in a last question, but we have answered all of the questions that were in the box. One more just came through. For providers using EVV for personal supports and respite, will this external provider interface system work for bringing out the documentation for the service logs of our EHR and into APD iConnect? And I stated that earlier, that at this time there is no interface between any other electronic visit verification documentation system. At this point, your staff will need to use the APD iConnect EVV mobile site deliver their service and include the service log in that record because it automatically uploads into APD iConnect. Can you please explain a little bit about the activity import? Is it all about service start, service end, service log notes? Yes, it is. And I'm going to recommend that you go back to this very first webinar for August 21, 2020 and watch that, because that will really give you the nuts and bolts of what it's called activity import. It's also called the external provider interface. But that's where all of the nuts and bolts are in terms of what's included. So please go back to that. And then if you have additional questions for any of you, after you've reviewed the material, while you're trying to get your XML file put together, if you encounter other questions, then use our iConnect EPI at APD Care's email. And again, we'll get those answers back to you as quickly as we can. Any other questions? Lisa, I will turn it over to you for wrap up.
Thank you, Sheila, and thank you to all the presenters. I just want to thank the providers and everybody that was on the webinar today. If you do have questions, please follow up with our APD iConnect email address, and I hope everyone has a great weekend. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa. And one last thing, I almost forgot to mention it. We are going to be holding these webinars on a monthly basis for a while folks are getting used to looking at the material, and because there may be questions that you have that will be helpful for another provider. So be on the lookout for ongoing advisories like the one that I've got up here on the screen that will have a link for you to register for the next webinar. But we are looking at doing this on a monthly basis, last Friday of the month at 11 o'clock, just like today. And again, we'll get advisories out to you so that you have time. Always, it's helpful if you can send any questions you have for the next webinar to the iConnect EPI at apdcares.org email address in advance, so that we can pull our information together and have the answers prepared for you. So with that, you guys have a great weekend, and thank you for your time.